Chapter 34. The vibrations shook me to the soul. It seemed that my soul vibrated back. I breathed in, shaping the sound with a thought, then thrust my hand forward and sent the music outward. Music only I could hear, music only I could control. I opened my eyes. A portion of the tunnel in front of me collapsed into a fine, powdery dust. I wore a mask, though Prof continued to assure me that the stuff wasn't as bad to breathe as I thought. I wore my mobile strapped to my forehead, shining brightly. The small tunnel through the steel was cramped, but I was alone, so I was able to move as much as I needed to. As always, using the tensor reminded me of Megan and that day when we'd infiltrated the power station. It reminded me of the elevator shaft where she'd shared with me things it seemed she hadn't shared with many. I'd asked Abraham if he'd known that she was from Portland, and he'd seemed surprised. He said she never spoke about her past. I scooped the steel dust into a bucket, then hauled it down the tunnel and dumped it. I did that a few more times, then got back to digging with the tensor. The others were hauling the dust the rest of the way out. I added a few feet to the tunnel, then checked my mobile to see how I was doing. Abraham had set up 3 others above to create a kind of triangulation system that let me cut this tunnel with precision. I needed to go a bit more to the right, then I needed to angle upward. Next time I pick a location to ambush a high epic, I thought, I'm going to choose one that's closer to established understreet tunnels. The rest of the team agreed with Abraham that they should wire the field with explosives from below, and they also wanted a few hidden tunnels leading up to the perimeter. I was pretty sure we'd be happy to have those when we faced Steelheart, but building all of it was getting very tiring. I almost regretted that I'd shown so much talent with the tensor. Almost. It was still pretty awesome to be able to dig through solid steel with just my hands. I couldn't hack like Tia, scout as well as Cody, or fix machinery like Abraham. This way, at least I had a place in the team. Of course, I thought as I vaporized another section of the wall, Prof's ability makes mine look like a piece of rice, and not even a cooked one. I was basically only useful in this role because he refused to take it. That dampened my satisfaction. A thought occurred to me. I raised my hand, summoning the tensor's vibrations. How had Prof done it to make that sword? He'd pounded the wall, hadn't he? I tried to mimic the motion, pounding my fist against the side of the tunnel and directing the burst of energy in my mind from the tensor. I didn't get a sword. I caused several handfuls of dust to stream out of a pocket in the wall, followed by a long lump of steel that looked vaguely like a bulbous carrot. Well, it's a start, I guess. I reached down to pick up the carrot, but I caught sight of a light moving up the small tunnel. I quickly kicked the carrot into the pile of dust and then got back to work. Prof soon moved up behind me. How's it going? Another couple of feet, I said. Then I can carve out the pocket for the explosives. Good, Prof said. Try to make it long and thin. We want to channel the explosion upward, not back down the tunnel here. I nodded. The plan was to weaken the roof of the pocket, which would lie just below the center of Soldier Field. Then we'd seal the explosives in with some careful welding by Cody, directing the blast the direction we wanted it to go. You keep at it, Prof said. For now, I'll take care of carting off the dust for you. I nodded, grateful for the chance to just spend some more time with the tensor. It was Cody's. He'd given it up for me as mine was still a ripped, zombie, droopy-eyed mess. I hadn't asked Prof about the 2 he carried. It didn't seem prudent. We worked in silence for a time, me carving out chunks of steel and Prof carting off the dust. He found my carrot sword and gave me an odd look. I hoped he didn't see me blush in the faint light. Eventually, my mobile beeped, telling me I was nearing the right depth. I carefully crafted a long hole at shoulder level. Then I reached in and began creating a small room to stuff the explosives into. Prof walked back, carrying his bucket, and saw what I'd done. He checked his mobile, looked up at the ceiling, then rapped softly at the metal with a small hammer. He nodded to himself, though I couldn't tell any difference in the way it sounded. You know, I said, I'm pretty sure these tensors defy the laws of physics. What, you mean destroying solid metal with your fingers isn't normal? More than that, I said. I think we get less dust than we should. It always seems to settle down and take up less space than the steel did, but it couldn't do that unless it was denser than the steel, which it can't possibly be. Prof grunted, filling another bucket. Nothing about the epics makes sense, I said, pulling a few armfuls of dust out of the hole I was making. Not even their powers. I hesitated. Particularly not their powers. True enough, Prof said. He continued filling his buckets. I owe you an apology, son, for how I acted. Tia explained it, I said quickly. She said you'd got some things in your past, some history with the tensors. It makes sense. It's okay. No, it's not. But that is what happens when I use the tensors. Well, it's like Tia said. Things in my past. I'm sorry for how I acted. There was no justification for it, especially considering what you'd just been through. It wasn't so bad, I said. What you did, I mean. The rest was horrible. I tried not to think about that long march with a dying girl in my arms. A dying girl I didn't save. I pushed forward. You were amazing, Prof. You shouldn't just use the tensors when we face Steelheart. You should use them all the time. Think of what— Stop! I froze. The tone of his voice sent a spike of shock down my spine. Prof breathed in and out deeply, his hands buried in steel dust. He closed his eyes. Don't speak like that, son. It doesn't do me any good. Please. All right, I said carefully. Just accept my apology, if you are willing. Of course. Prof nodded, turning back to his work. Can I ask you something? I said. I won't mention, not directly, at least. Go ahead, then. Well, you invented these things. Amazing things. The Harmsway, the jackets. From what Abraham tells me, you had these devices when you founded the Reckoners. I did. So, why not make us something else? Another kind of weapon based off the epics? I mean, you sell knowledge to people like Diamond, and he sells it to scientists who are working to create technology like this. I figure you've got to be as good at it as any of them are. Why sell the knowledge and not use it yourself? Prof worked in silence for a few minutes, then walked over to help me pull dust out of the hole I was making. That's a good question. Have you asked Abraham or Cody? I grimaced. Cody talks about demons or fairies, which he claims the Irish totally stole from his ancestors. I can't tell if he's serious. He's not, Prof said. He just likes to see how people react when he says things like that. Abraham thinks it's because you don't have a lab now, like you used to. Without the right equipment, you can't design new technology. Abraham is a very thoughtful man. What do you think? I think that if you can find the resources to buy or steal explosives, cycles, and even copters when you need them, you could get yourself a lab. There's got to be another reason. Prof dusted off his hands and turned to look at me. All right, I can see where this is going. You may ask one question about my past. He said it as if it were a kind of a gift, like a penance. He had treated me poorly, in part because of something that had happened in his past. The recompense he gave was a piece of that past. I found myself completely unprepared. What did I want to know? Did I ask how he'd come up with the tensors? Did I ask what it was that made him not want to use them? He seemed to be bracing himself. I don't want to drag him through that, I thought. Not if it affects him so profoundly. I wouldn't want to do that any more than I would have wanted someone to drag me through memories of what had happened to Megan. I decided to pick something more benign. What were you? I asked. Before Calamity. What was your job? Prof seemed taken aback. That's your question? Yes. You're sure you want to know? I nodded. I was a 5th grade science teacher, Prof said. I opened my mouth to laugh at his joke, but the tone of his voice made me hesitate. Really? I finally asked. Really. An epic destroyed the school. It was still in session. He stared up at the wall, emotion bleeding from his face. He was putting a mask up. And here I thought it had been an innocent question. But the tensors, I said. The harm's way. You worked at a lab at some point, right? No, he said. The tensors in the harm's way don't belong to me. The others just assume I invented them. I didn't. That revelation stunned me. Prof turned away to gather up his buckets. The kids at the school called me Prof, too. It always sticks, though I'm not a professor. I didn't even go to graduate school. I only ended up teaching science by accident. It was the teaching itself that I loved. At least, I loved it back when I thought it would be enough to change things. He walked off down the tunnel, leaving me to wonder. That's it. Y'all can turn around now.